There Was a Country by Chinua Achebe, Part 2. The Question of Genocide. I will begin by stating that I am not a sociologist, a political scientist, a human rights lawyer, or a government official. My aim is not to provide all the answers, but to raise questions and perhaps to cause a few headaches in the process. Almost 30 years before Rwanda, before Darfur, over 2 million people, mothers, children, babies, civilians, lost their lives as a result of the blatantly callous and unnecessary policies enacted by the leaders of the federal government of Nigeria. As a writer, I believe that it is fundamentally important, indeed essential, to our humanity to ask the hard questions in order to better understand ourselves and our neighbors. Where there is justification for further investigation, then I believe justice should be served. In the case of the Nigerian-Biafran War, there is precious little relevant literature that helps answer these questions. Did the federal government of Nigeria engage in the genocide of its Igbo citizens through their punitive policies, the most notorious being starvation as a legitimate weapon of war? Is the information blockade around the war a case of calculated historical suppression? Why has the war not been discussed or taught to the young over 40 years after its end? Are we perpetually doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past because we are too stubborn to learn from them? We did not get into the pricky ticket of diagnosing the reasons for the federal government's attempt to fool the world about what happened in Biafra. However, it may be helpful to start by defining the term genocide. Robert S. Leventhal provides this description. The term genocide derives from the Latin genus, race, tribe, side, killing, and means literally the killing or murder of an entire tribe or people. The Oxford English Dictionary defines genocide as the deliberate and systematic extermination of an ethnic or national group. By genocide, we mean the destruction of a nation or an ethnic group. The UN General Assembly adopted this term and defined it in 1946 as a denial of the right of existence of entire human groups. The arguments. Throughout the conflict, the Biafrans consistently charged that the Nigerians had a design to exterminate the Igbo people from the face of the earth. This calculation, the Biafrans insisted, was predicted on a holy jihad proclaimed by mainly Islamic extremists in the Nigerian army and supported by the policies of economic blockade that prevented shipments of humanitarian aid, food and supplies to the needy in Biafra. The argument extended by Harold Wilson's government in defense of the federal government of Nigeria is important to highlight. The charges of jihad have also been denied by British officials who assert that more than half the members of the federal government are Christian, while only 1,000 of 60 to 70,000 federal soldiers are Muslim houses from the north. House of Commons debate cited earlier. Herbert Ekwekwe, professor of history and politics and an expert on genocide, reminds us that supporters of the Biafran position point not only to the histrionic pronouncements of the leaders of the Nigerian army, often dismissed as typical outrageous wartime rhetoric, but to an actual series of atrocities, real crimes against humanity that occurred on the battlefield and as a result of the policies of the federal government of Nigeria. The International Committee in the Investigation of Crimes of Genocide carried out exhaustive investigation of the evidence, interviewing 1,082 people representing all the actors in the dispute, the two sides of the civil war and international collaborators. After a thorough, painstaking research, the Commission concludes through its investigator, Dr. Mensah of Ghana. Finally, I am of the opinion that in many of the cases cited to me, hatred of the Biafrans, mainly Igbos, and a wish to exterminate them was a foremost motivational factor. emphasis in original. In his well researched book, The Brutality of Nations, Dan Jacobs uncovers a provocative paragraph from an editorial in the Washington Post of July 2nd, 1969. One word now describes the policy of the Nigerian military government towards secessionist Biafra: genocide. It is ugly and extreme, but it is the only word which fits Nigerians' decision to stop the International Committee of the Red Cross and other relief agencies from flying food to Biafra. Jacobs also reveals the lamentations of Pope Paul VI over the Nigerian-Biafran War. The war seems to be reaching its conclusion, with the terror of possible reprisals and massacres against defenseless people, worn out by deprivations, by hunger, and by loss of all they possess. The news this morning is very alarming. One fear torments public opinion, the fear that the victory of arms may carry with it the killing of numberless people. There are those who actually fear a kind of genocide. The distinguished American historian, social critic, and political insider Arthur M. Schlesinger provides this contribution on the dire situation in Biafra. The terrible tragedy of the people of Biafra has now assumed catastrophic dimensions. Starvation is daily claiming the lives of an estimated 6,000 Igbo tribesmen, most of them children. If adequate food is not delivered to the people in the immediate future, hundreds of thousands of human beings will die of hunger. In what is likely to be the most compelling statement of the era from an American president, Schlesinger provides this powerful extract from Richard Nixon's campaign speech on September 10, 1968. Until now, efforts to relieve the Biafran people have been thwarted by the desire of the central government of Nigeria to pursue total and unconditional victory, and by the fear of the Igbo people that surrender means wholesale atrocities and genocide. But genocide is what is taking place right now, and starvation is the Grim Reaper. This is not the time to stand on ceremony or to go through channels or to observe the diplomatic niceties. The destruction of an entire people is an immoral objective even in the most moral of wars. It can never be justified, it can never be condoned. Two distinguished Canadian diplomats, Mr. Andrew Brevin and Mr. David MacDonald, members of the Canadian Parliament, reported that genocide is in fact taking place, and one of them stated that anybody who says that there is no evidence of genocide is either in the pay of Britain or being a deliberate fool. Following a visit to the war-torn region, New York Times journalist Lloyd Garrison, who covered the conflict, submitted harrowing accounts of genocidal activity on the part of the Nigerian troops. The record shows that in federal advances, thousands of Igbo male civilians were sought out and slaughtered. Supporters of the Nigerian federal government's position maintain that a war was being waged, and the premise of all wars is for one side to emerge as the victor. Overly ambitious actors may have taken actions unbecoming of international conventions of human rights, but these things happen everywhere. This same group often cites findings from groups sanctioned by the Nigerian federal government that sent observers to the country during the crisis that there was no clear intent on behalf of the Nigerian troops to wipe out the Igbo people, pointing out that over 30,000 Igbos still lived in Lagos and 500,000 in the Midwest. The British government, wary of the morally bankrupt position that Harold Wilson had told from the onset of the conflict, sought to explain away their reckless military adventure in Africa. There were real excesses to account for. If the diabolical disregard for human life seen during the war was not due to the northern military elite's jihadist or genocidal obsession, then why were there more small arms used on Biafran soil than during the entire 5-year period of World War II? Why were there 100,000 casualties on the much larger Nigerian side compared with more than 2 million, mainly children, Biafrans killed? The government of Harold Wilson proffered what it called a legitimate strategy excuse, in which it postulates that the indisputable excesses seen during the war were due to the Nigerian military's excellence, clearly making it the strongest candidate for an all-time foot-in-the-mouth prize.